I came back from the cabin without warning. I'd forgotten my keys. Walking into the apartment, I went numb. My daughter was on her knees in front of her father-in-law. He was holding her by her hair and saying, "Now I'm going to teach you how a real woman is supposed to act in her husband's house." Friends, before I begin my story, I have a small request. If stories about tough decisions and complicated destinies touch your heart, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. And in the comments, let us know what city you're listening from. It always warms my spirit to see how many of us are out there. Enjoy the story. Silence. That was what I valued more than anything. I spent my whole life working as the head archivist of the county, surrounded by the silent witnesses of history, yellowed pages, birth records, and wax seals. Documents don't scream, they don't demand attention, they just hold the truth until someone decides to find it. But for the last 2 years, my own home, my sanctuary with its high ceilings and creaky oak floors, had ceased to be a place of silence. It had turned into a battleground. I always believed that patience was a woman's highest virtue. When my daughter Zadie married Elroy, I made room, both literally and figuratively. I gave the newlyweds the master bedroom and moved myself into the smaller room facing the courtyard. I thought I was helping to build a family. But along with my son-in-law, it wasn't just his suitcase that entered our home, but the thick, sticky shadow of his father, Cornelius Thorne. Cornelius didn't just come to visit, he conducted rounds. Every visit felt like a general inspecting a barracks where the soldiers were already guilty of something. "Ms. Althea," he would boom, barely stepping over the threshold, not even taking off his heavy cashmere coat. "It smells damp in your foyer again. This is unacceptable for a home raising the future elite of society." By elite, he meant my son-in-law Elroy, and of course himself. I usually stayed quiet. What was I supposed to say? That the house was old, pre-war, and it breathed the only way it knew how? I just nodded, offered tea, and retreated to the kitchen so as not to interrupt men's business. I could hear him lecturing Zadie for napkins that weren't starched enough, for the soup being too thin, for spending too much time on her drawings. Artist. He spat the word out like a curse. A woman should paint comfort in the home, not a mess on a canvas. And Elroy? Elroy sat right there, eyes lowered into his plate, chewing silently. He never defended her. Never. To keep from losing my mind in that suffocating atmosphere, I escaped. My salvation was the cabin, an old A-frame about 20 miles outside the city. There, among the wild berry bushes and ancient oak trees, I could breathe again. I went there at the slightest opportunity, leaving the apartment entirely at the disposal of the Thorne dynasty, as Cornelius loved to call them. I thought my absence made my daughter's life easier. I thought my silence was buying her peace. Lord, how wrong I was. That Thursday, I had driven up to the cabin intending to stay until Sunday. The weather was surprisingly warm for October. The air was crisp and clear. I spent the whole day in the garden, covering the rose bushes for winter. It was only toward evening, when the sun was already dipping behind the pines, that I felt that familiar heaviness at the base of my skull. Blood pressure. I reached for my bag where my medicine kit usually was, and my blood ran cold. The pill organizer was still at home, on the dresser in the hallway. I clearly remembered taking it out to find my keys, and in my haste, forgetting to put it back. Staying at the cabin without my medication was risky. I wasn't at an age to play games with hypertension. Sighing, I packed my things. The last bus had already left, but I was lucky enough to catch a ride back to the city with a neighbor. The whole way, I stared at the lights blurring past the window and thought about Zadie. Lately she had become so pale, so quiet. The mischief that used to dance in her eyes had been replaced by fear. I chalked it up to them adjusting to married life, to the grind. I convinced myself, they'll work it out. Love takes time. The main thing was not to interfere. A mother-in-law always ruins things. I was so afraid of becoming that angry, stereotypical mother-in-law that I had turned myself invisible. I walked up to my building at dusk. The windows of our third-floor apartment were blazing with bright, anxious light. Usually, Zadie loved dim lighting. floor lamps, coziness. But this was full illumination, like an operating room. Climbing the stairs, I reached for my keys out of habit, but stopped. The door wasn't locked. The latch was just pulled to, but it hadn't clicked into the groove. Someone must have entered or left in a hurry, or they were expecting someone. I slipped into the foyer silently. Years of working in the archives had taught me to walk without disturbing the dust. A strange, ringing silence hung in the apartment. No TV, no clinking dishes, only a low, measured voice drifting from the living room. "Because you don't understand your place, little girl." It was Cornelius. But the tone, it wasn't the grumpy tone I was used to. There was a cold, sadistic threat in this voice. I took a few steps down the hallway. My heart was beating somewhere in my throat, but my feet carried me forward on their own. I stopped in the doorway, hidden by the shadow of the china cabinet, and looked into the living room. The image that revealed itself to me burned away every last shred of sentimentality I had left. In the middle of the room, on our old Persian rug, my daughter, my proud, talented Zadie, was on her knees. She was wearing a simple house dress, her head hung low. Before her, looming like a cliff, stood Cornelius. He was holding her by her hair, not just holding it. He had wrapped her thick, dark braids around his fist, forcing her to tilt her head back so her neck was unnaturally arched. A grimace of pain and humiliation was frozen on her face. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. "Repeat it," Cornelius said quietly, almost gently, and that gentleness reeked of the grave. "Repeat what I said." In the corner of the room by the window stood Elroy, my son-in-law, my daughter's husband. He stood with his back to them, staring into the dark glass. His shoulders were trembling, but he didn't turn around. He knew what was happening, and he was doing nothing. I was wrong," Zadie whispered. Her voice shook and broke. Cornelius yanked her hair harder. Zadie let out a quiet sob. Louder, and with respect. "I was wrong! Now I'm going to teach you how a real woman is supposed to act in her husband's house, since your own mother didn't bother to explain these simple truths to you." In that moment, something inside me died. The Althea who feared conflict died. The woman who believed that a bad peace is better than a good war died. All the fear, all my polite softness vanished, evaporated, leaving behind only icy clarity. It was as if I were looking at an old, damaged document that needed urgent restoration, or history would be lost forever. I didn't scream. I didn't throw myself at him with my fists. What could an elderly woman do against a heavy-set man pushing 250 pounds? Any hysteria right now would work against us. He would say I was crazy, that I was imagining things, that this was a disciplinary matter. No, archivists don't make scenes. Archivists document facts. Slowly, trying not to let a floorboard creak, I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway and took my smartphone out of my pocket. The camera turned on silently. I raised the phone, catching Cornelius's profile distorted by power, his fist in my daughter's hair, and Elroy's indifferent back. I hit record. Seconds stretched into eternity. The screen captured every word, every movement. "You should thank us, Zadie. Thank us for accepting you into the family," he said, leaning into her face. Save. I dropped the phone into my pocket. The video was saved. I had the proof. Now I needed to act, not as a protective mother, but as a strategist. If I walked in now, they would make excuses. I needed to catch them off guard, but in a way that left them no time to concoct a lie. I turned back to the front door, grabbed the handle, opened it wide, and then slammed it shut with all my might, loud and rattling, as if I had just burst in from the street without a care for silence. "Zadie! Elroy! I'm home!" I shouted in a bright, casual voice, throwing off my coat. "Can you believe it? I forgot my medicine!" The sound of the slamming door rang out like a gunshot. A deathly silence fell over the living room, followed by frantic shuffling, like rats scurrying into corners. I took a deep breath and stepped out to meet the enemy. I walked into the living room, shuffling my slippers a little louder than usual, feigning shortness of breath. The scene had changed instantly, like in a cheap vaudeville show where the curtain drops too early. Cornelius was no longer looming over my daughter. He was standing by the fireplace, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine white dress shirt, and a mask of benevolence was rapidly forming on his face, which was still red from exertion. Zadie jumped up from her knees. She moved jerkily like a broken doll. She turned her face away, hiding her eyes from me, and mumbling something incoherent about a kettle left on the stove, she darted past me into the kitchen. I felt her shoulder brush mine. She was trembling. That trembling passed to me, but I forced my hands to stay steady. I just gripped the pill bottle tighter, which had conveniently been in my coat pocket. "Ah, Ms. Althea." The in-law's voice sounded almost joyful, though cold malice still splashed in his small, beady eyes. "We were just discussing family traditions with the young folks. Zadie, you know, she can be a bit too emotional sometimes." "Nerves, it's all nerves." Elroy finally turned from the window. He didn't look at his father. He looked at the toes of his shoes. "Yes, Mama," he squeezed out. "We were just talking." I sank into an armchair, sighing heavily, and rubbed my temples. "Oh, Cornelius, getting old is no joy. My head started hurting so bad I didn't even notice you had come over." "And Zadie?" "Yes, she's sensitive. Been that way since childhood." I saw the tension in his shoulders drop. He bought it. He didn't see a threat. He saw a tired, foolish old woman concerned with her blood pressure. To a man like Cornelius, women are divided into two types, those who can be used and those who can be ignored. I voluntarily stepped into the second category. "You should get some rest, Ms. Althea," he threw out condescendingly, heading for the exit. "I won't tire you out. I have a big day at the committee tomorrow. We're preparing for the city's centennial jubilee. You understand, the Thorn Line has always been at the center of our region's history." He left, leaving behind the smell of expensive cologne mixed with the smell of fear, which now soaked the walls of my apartment. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, listening to the silence in my daughter's room through the wall. It was too dense, that silence. I knew Zadie wasn't sleeping. I knew she was lying there, staring at the ceiling, hating herself for her weakness. I wanted to go to her, hug her, tell her I saw everything. But I stopped myself. If I interfered now, if I made a scene, Cornelius would just take Elroy, pressure Zadie with debts, and paint us as hysterical women. He was a master manipulator. To defeat a dragon, you don't charge at it with a pocket knife. You need to know where the soft underbelly is beneath the scales. I needed a weapon, and I knew exactly where it lay. In the morning, as soon as the city woke up, I dressed strictly but modestly in my usual gray coat and left the house. I told Zadie I was going to the pharmacy, but my path lay in a different direction. The city archives were located in the building of the former Merchants Guild. Massive doors, the smell of old paper and dust. This smell was dearer to me than perfume. I had worked here for 40 years. I was greeted with smiles. The young intern at the front desk didn't even ask for a pass, just nodded. "Good morning, Miss Althea. Coming to visit us?" "Yes, sweetheart." I smiled my most harmless smile. "Decided to check on old friends and clarify a few things from my memoirs." I walked into the vault. It was cool in there, rows of metal shelves stretched into the gloom. I knew this labyrinth by heart. My fingers remembered where to look. I didn't go to the city council section, where Cornelius would have looked for confirmation of his greatness. I went to the private collections section, sealed by special order. 20 years ago, Etta, Cornelius's wife and my best friend, was dying of cancer. A week before the end, she handed me a box. "Hide this, Althea," she whispered then, squeezing my hand with dry, hot fingers. "If Cornelius finds this, he'll destroy everything. Promise me you'll open this only in dire need." I promised. I filed the documents as an unclaimed private archive and shoved the box into the farthest corner of shelf number 17. I hoped this day would never come. I kept the piece of Etta's memory, allowing Cornelius to play the grieving widower and the great patriarch. But yesterday he raised a hand to my daughter. The statute of limitations had expired. I found the box. It was covered in a thin layer of gray dust. Blowing it off, I untied the strings of the folder. Inside lay letters, yellowed envelopes covered in Etta's small beaded handwriting, and beneath them, a thick notebook with a faux leather cover, a medical registry from a private clinic that had closed in the late 90s. I scanned the documents. My heart beat steadily and sharply, like a metronome. This wasn't just a weapon. This was a bomb capable of blowing apart the entire fake facade Cornelius had been building for decades. His vaunted dynasty, his pride in his ancestors' blood, his right to power, it all rested on one big lie. I carefully placed the papers in my bag. Now I knew what to do. Walking out of the archives, I sat on a bench in the square. The sun shone bright but offered no warmth. I took out my phone and dialed the in-law's number. It rang for a long time. He didn't like to answer immediately. He held the pause to emphasize his importance. "Speaking," his baritone finally boomed. "Good morning, Cornelius. It's Althea. I hope I'm not distracting you from state affairs." My voice was soft, almost fawning. "I'm busy, Ms. Althea. Speak to the point." Of course, it's about yesterday. You were talking about the Jubilee, about the campaign for city council. I was thinking, I do have some savings from selling my parents' cabin, and just what I've set aside. I understand elections are an expensive business. Silence hung on the line. I could almost physically feel the calculator clicking in his head. Greed. That was the chink in his armor where I intended to slide the blade. "Go on." His tone changed. The irritation vanished, replaced by predatory interest. "I would like to make a contribution. We are family, after all. And for Zadie, it would probably be more peaceful if we showed solidarity. Maybe you could stop by for tea today? Around 5 o'clock? Zadie won't be here. She went out to sketch so we can talk frankly. About figures." He coughed, trying to hide his eagerness. "Well, family support? That is commendable. I'll find a window in my schedule. I'll be there at 5. I hung up and looked at the archive building. He thinks he's coming for an old fool's money. He doesn't know I've prepared tea flavored with ashes. At exactly 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Persistent, demanding, 2 short bursts. Cornelius wasn't late, and he didn't arrive early. He appeared exactly when he said, as if time itself was obliged to adjust to his schedule. I opened the door, feigning hospitality. I was wearing my best house dress, dark green with a brooch at the collar, and on my face was a mask of submissive waiting. "Come in, Cornelius, come in," I bustled, taking his heavy coat. He allowed me to wait on him without even looking in my direction, as if I were a coat rack. He walked into the living room like he owned the place, scanning the room as if already calculating what could be remodeled. On the table sat my signature caramel cake, fine china, and silver spoons, everything he liked. Attributes of a decent home that he bragged about so much. "Well, Ms. Althea." He sank into the armchair, the springs creaking pitifully beneath him. "I'm glad you've shown some prudence. Family is, above all, a common pot and common goals." He immediately took a piece of cake without waiting for an invitation. He ate greedily but neatly, wiping the corners of his mouth with a napkin after every bite. I sat opposite, hands folded in my lap, observing. "Of course, Cornelius. I understand what a responsibility it is to be a thorn. The elections, the council, it all requires funds." "Precisely." He nodded, swallowing a chunk. "A campaign is an expensive affair. Banners, meetings, press. People need to see power. They need to see that history stands behind me. By the way, about the sum. What figure are we discussing?" I named a sum. Not too big to look suspiciously generous, but not small either, enough to make his eyes light up with a greedy glint. It was money saved for a rainy day. Well, I couldn't imagine a rainier day than yesterday. "Respectable." He nodded graciously, leaning back. "That will cover the printing costs. Zadie, of course, could earn something herself, but with her character and talents—" He waved his hand dismissively. "You've spoiled her too much, Althea. A woman should be a quiet harbor, not a storm in a water glass. Look at my Etta. She was a saint of a woman, quiet, submissive, knew her place. At the mention of Etta, everything inside me tightened. Knew her place. I remembered that place. I remembered her tear-stained eyes, the bruises she hid under long sleeves, and the animal fear with which she flinched at the sound of his footsteps. Yes, Etta was wonderful, I said quietly, pouring him more tea. By the way, Cornelius, I was going through some old papers in the closet the other day. You know, nostalgia, and I found a curious thing. I stood up and went to the dresser, where I had placed a small stack of letters tied with a ribbon beforehand. It was just a tiny fraction of what I had taken from the archives, the most innocent part, just correspondence between Etta and her sister about the weather and fabric prices. No secrets, just household nonsense. I placed the stack on the edge of the table next to his cup. Etta's letters. I thought maybe you'd find it pleasant to read, to remember your youth. She writes so warmly about your home. Cornelius didn't even touch the letters. He cast a squeamish glance at them, as if I had put a dead mouse on the table. "Why do I need that junk?" he scoffed. "The past should stay in the past. Etta was a simple woman, Althea. What could she write about? Seedlings? Gossip? No." "But it's a memory," I murmured, intentionally playing the role of a sentimental fool. "Memory is monuments, Ms. Althea. It's crests, it's medals, it's achievements. But papers scribbled with women's nonsense, that's trash." He pushed his cup away. "Get rid of it. Better yet, burn it. No need to clutter the house. You can already barely breathe in here from the dust." He said it with such ease. Burn it. He was sure he knew everything about his wife. He was sure she was an empty shell created only to serve as his background. His arrogance was so great, he didn't even entertain the thought that a simple woman could have her own secrets. That was his fatal mistake. He underestimated not only me, but the woman he lived with for 30 years. "As you say, Cornelius," I agreed submissively, putting the letters back in the drawer. "You know best." He stood up, brushing crumbs from his trousers. The talk about money had calmed him, filled him with a sense of self-importance. He got what he came for, and now hurried to leave so as not to waste his precious time on the company of a boring old woman. Already in the foyer, putting on his coat, he stopped and looked around the hallway. "By the way, Ms. Althea, since we are now partners in the campaign, next week photographers are coming to see me. Need the ambiance for the brochure, you understand? The atmosphere of an old noble nest. My study is being renovated, so I decided to hold the shoot here. You have high ceilings, crown molding." I froze. He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact. "Here?" I repeated. "Yes, but some things need fixing." He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket and handed it to me. "Here's a list. Those curtains in the living room? Hideous. Take them down. We need heavy velvet ones, burgundy or emerald. Rearrange the furniture according to the diagram, and take those knickknacks off the shelves. Leave only the leather-bound books. Everything must look dignified. Get it done by Tuesday." He shoved the list into my hand like I was a bellhop at a hotel. "And warn Zadie. Have her dress decently. No jeans. Floor-length dresses, hair pulled back. She needs to look like a worthy daughter of her—" He caught himself for a second. "Of her husband." He slapped me on the shoulder with a heavy, patronizing gesture. "Don't let me down, Althea. We're doing this for the future." The door closed behind him. I stood in the hallway, clutching the list of his demands in my hand. Remove the curtains, move the furniture, hide the knickknacks. He was ordering me to reshape my own home, to turn it into a set for his play. I unfolded the paper. His handwriting was large, sprawling, with heavy pressure. The list was long. I walked slowly into the kitchen, put the paper on the table next to the half-eaten cake, then took out a matchbox. I struck a match against the side. The flame flared up merry and bright. I held it to the corner of the list. The paper caught instantly. I watched the fire devour his orders, watched the letters blacken and curl, turning into ash. "Burn that trash," he said about Etta's letters. "Well, Cornelius, I fulfilled your request. I started burning the trash. You were just mistaken about exactly what constitutes trash in this house." The ash fell onto the saucer. I rubbed it with my finger. Black soot stained my skin. Now that he had so carelessly brushed off the past, confident in his invulnerability, my hands were untied. He invited war into my house himself. He set the date of the battle himself. Tuesday, photo session. Perfect. I would have just enough time to prepare the scenery, only the script would be mine. And at the finale of this play, he wouldn't be getting any applause. I went to wash the dishes. The water rushed, washing the leftover frosting from the plates, and a plan was already forming in my head. Quiet, not hysterical, quiet as a whisper in a library, a whisper that brings down empires. The next morning, I started my renovations, but instead of running to the store for velvet drapes, I put on my Sunday coat and went visiting. First on my list was Mrs. Calloway, Lucille, the widow of the former mayor. This woman knew everything about the city, and more importantly, the city knew everything from her. She was a living telegraph, transmitting news faster than any internet connection. I didn't come empty-handed. I brought an album of old photographs, allegedly to prepare an exhibition for the Jubilee. "Lucille, darling," I cooed, flipping through pages over tea. "Look, isn't this precious? That's our park in 53. And this... Oh, look, that's Cornelius's grandfather." I pointed to a group shot of factory workers. Among them, in a greasy jumpsuit holding a hammer, stood a stocky man. "Strange," I drawled thoughtfully, adjusting my glasses. "Cornelius always says his grandfather was an officer, a war hero, commanded a regiment. But here he is in a pipefitters' brigade in 53. Did officers work as pipefitters?" Mrs. Calloway squinted, bringing the photo to her eyes. "Indeed." A hunter's note rang in her voice. "Very strange. Thorne loves to talk about noble roots and officers' honor. And here a simple laborer. No, labor is honorable, of course, but why lie?" The seed was planted. I knew that by evening, this photograph, or rather the rumor of it, would fly through every parlor in the city. Thorne is a liar. His biography is a fake. That was the first, barely noticeable prick of the needle. That same day, I stopped by 2 more keepers of our city's hearth. To one, I casually showed an old newspaper clipping where the Thorne surname was mentioned in a list of debtors for rent back in 1998. To the other, I complained about how hard it is to find a good notary for asset division these days, and accidentally dropped the phrase, "It's good that Cornelius and I have everything transparent, although they say he has big problems with the banks." I wasn't accusing. I was just wondering. I was a confused old lady finding inconsistencies, and it worked flawlessly. Returning home, I continued my quiet sabotage. On the coffee table in the living room, where Elroy usually drank his evening coffee, I forgot a few brochures. Family law, division of assets, how to protect yourself from spousal debt, psychological abuse, signs and help. In the evening, when my son-in-law returned from work, I watched him from the kitchen through the cracked door. He sat on the sofa, rubbed his face tiredly, and reached for the remote. His gaze fell on the bright cover of the divorce brochure. He froze. His hand with the remote hung in the air. He looked around, as if afraid someone would see him looking at it, and quickly, fussily covered the brochures with a newspaper. But I saw his shoulders tense up. Fear, sticky, cold fear, began to seep into his cozy little world of submission. At night, when the house went quiet, I finally sat at my desk and took out what really mattered. Etta's letters, the ones Cornelius ordered me to burn. I turned on the desk lamp and put on my reading glasses. My hands were trembling slightly as I unfolded the yellowed sheets. I knew there might be something important, but what I read turned everything upside down. "Dearest Althea," Etta wrote in a letter from 1978, "I don't know how to live with this lie. Cornelius forbade me to speak even to doctors. He said if anyone finds out, he'll kill himself or me. Mumps. Ordinary childhood mumps that he had when he was 12. The doctor said, sterility, absolute, irreversible. I reread those lines 3 times. Sterility. I picked up the next letter. We took a boy from the orphanage in the next county. Cornelius arranged everything. He paid the head doctor a huge amount of money to rewrite the birth certificate so no one would know he isn't our child. We named him Elroy. Cornelius said, now I have an heir. The line won't break. But he hates him, Althea. He looks at him and sees not a son, but proof of his inadequacy. He punishes him for every breath, for every step. He breaks him so no one suspects that this boy doesn't have his great blood. The medical registry confirmed every word. Patient record, Thorn, C. Diagnosis, orchitis, complicated by azoospermia. And next to it, the forged birth certificate for Elroy, where in the field for father, a confident hand had written, Thorn, Cornelius. I leaned back in my chair. The room was stuffy, but I was shivering. Elroy wasn't his son. All this tyranny, all this blood cult, all these endless talks about breed and genes, it was all a monstrous, grotesque lie. Cornelius wasn't just lying to those around him. He built a hell for an adopted child to hide his own male inadequacy. He bullied Elroy his whole life, suppressed his will, turned him into a doormat just because the boy's very existence reminded him of his defect. And at the same time, he demanded he be a worthy thorn. What cynicism! What bottomless vileness! I carefully folded the letters back into the folder. Now I held in my hands not just dirt. I held the key to Elroy's freedom. If he finds out, this tyrant is nobody to him. If he understands he isn't obligated to carry the cross of a dynasty that doesn't exist. Suddenly, my bedroom door creaked. I jumped and quickly covered the folder with a shawl. Zadie stood in the doorway. She was in a nightgown, pale as a sheet, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hands picked at the lace hem. "Mama," she whispered, "are you awake?" "No, darling, come in." She came in and sat on the edge of my bed. She was shaking. I silently took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "Mama, I can't take it anymore." Her voice broke into a sob. He doesn't just yell." I squeezed her hand tighter. "Tell me." "This afternoon, when you were out, he called, Cornelius. He said I have to take out another loan. For $50,000. My breath caught. "But you already have the mortgage and that car loan." "Mama, that's not all." She looked up at me with eyes full of terror. "He made me take out 3 loans already in the last year. For his projects, for his investments. He said it was temporary, that he'd pay it all back with interest as soon as he won the tender, but he doesn't pay anything back. He just spends the money, Mama, on his suits, on banquets, on creating an image." "Lord have mercy," I exhaled. "Why didn't you say anything?" "He threatened me." Zadie started crying, covering her face with her hands. "He said if I refused or told anyone, he'd make Elroy divorce me. He said he'd sue for custody if we ever had kids, that he'd have me declared mentally incompetent, that he has connections everywhere. Mama, I signed everything. I'm scared of him. He's crazy." I hugged my daughter, pressing her head to my chest. I stroked her hair, feeling cold, calculated rage boiling inside me. He wasn't just a tyrant, he was bankrupt. He was a parasite attached to my daughter, sucking the life and future out of her to feed his bloated pride. He drove her into a debt pit. He blackmailed her with a family he never had by right of blood. "Hush, baby girl, hush," I whispered, rocking her like I did when she was small. "Everything is going to be all right. No one is going to touch you. No one is going to take your future." I looked at the folder under the shawl, then at the clock. It was 3:00 a.m. "Go to sleep, Zadie. Tomorrow is a new day." "Mama, what are we going to do?" She lifted her tear-stained face. "We're trapped." "No," I said firmly. "We aren't the ones trapped. He is. He just doesn't know the lid is slammed shut yet." I tucked her in, gave her a sedative, and waited until she fell asleep. I didn't go to bed myself. I sat in the dark and thought. The stakes had risen to the heavens. This was no longer just about moral humiliation. This was about financial catastrophe and criminal acts. If I simply exposed his lineage, in his malice, he might destroy Zadie financially before he went down. The loans were in her name. Banks don't care who anyone's son is. I needed to act fast and ruthlessly. I didn't just need to defeat him. I needed to crush him publicly, so that no one, not the banks, not the judges, not Elroy, would have any doubt about who he was. Tuesday. Photo session. No, that's too small. I remembered the dinner. The celebratory dinner he planned to host in honor of launching his campaign. "Gather the best people in the city," he said. Excellent. I will help him gather the best people. I will throw him a reception this city will never forget. I took out my planner and started making a guest list. Not the ones he wanted to see, sycophants and new money, but the ones he feared, the ones who remembered real history, and those who could witness his collapse. I wrote the first name. Head of the credit department at First National Bank. Second, editor-in-chief of the City Gazette. The war had moved into the active phase, and I, Althea Vance, the quiet archival mouse, was preparing to be its general. The next morning I called Cornelius. My voice sounded excited, but it was the excitement of a devoted assistant ready to do anything for her patron's success. "Cornelius, I have amazing news," I chirped into the receiver. "I spoke to my acquaintances. You won't believe it, but Mrs. Calloway and even the chairman of the Veterans Council expressed a desire to personally congratulate you on your nomination. They want to see you in an informal setting, so to speak. No ties." A pause hung on the line. I knew he was puffing up with pride right now like a turkey. The attention of the old guard was a drug to him. "Well then," he drawled leisurely. "That is to be expected. People are drawn to leaders. When?" "Saturday. At my place. I'll host a dinner. Only our most important people. It will be a perfect rehearsal before the big banquet." "Good." He agreed so quickly I barely suppressed a smirk. His vanity was his guide, and I was leading him straight off a cliff. "Just Althea, make sure the table is appropriate. No potato salad? Game, sturgeon, good wine. I'll send a wine list." "Of course, Cornelius. Everything will be top tier." I spent the whole week preparing, but not for a celebration, for an execution. I ordered food from a restaurant so I wouldn't be stuck at the stove. I needed my strength. I polished the silverware to a mirror shine so it would reflect his disgrace, and I sent out the invitations. But the most important thing I did was on Friday. I went to the bank. I didn't have power of attorney, but I had an old acquaintance, Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, with whom we once worked on the Historical Preservation Commission. I came to him not as a client, but as a weeping mother. "Robert," I said, sitting in his office and crumpling a handkerchief, "I'm scared for my daughter, my son-in-law. He's acting strangely, taking out loans, says it's for his father's business. But I see there's no money. Zadie cries, says she signed some papers without looking. I'm begging you, just tell me how bad it is. I'm not asking for statements, I just need to know. Do I sell my apartment to save them from prison?" Mr. Henderson, a soul of kindness, couldn't refuse. He went pale looking at the monitor. "Ms. Althea." He took off his glasses. "It's not just bad, it's a catastrophe. 3 consumer loans, crazy interest rates, and all the money was transferred the same day to accounts of some fly-by-night brokerage firms. It's a pyramid scheme, Althea, pure and simple." He printed me an unofficial reference, movement of funds, signatures, dates. It was proof not just of stupidity, but of Cornelius's criminal negligence, playing with my daughter's money in a casino called Investments. Saturday arrived. By 6:00 p.m., my apartment was transformed. I had removed extra items, creating an illusion of space. The table was covered with a snow-white tablecloth. Crystal sparkled. The guests began to gather. Mrs. Calloway arrived in a severe black suit, lips pursed. Old Dr. Abernathy came, who had known everyone in this town since they were in diapers. 3 other respected citizens arrived, the very matriarchs and patriarchs whose opinion was law. They greeted each other with restrained nods. They didn't come to celebrate. They came to watch the spectacle of unseen audacity I had hinted at. Cornelius appeared last. He walked in like a victor in a new graphite-colored suit with cufflinks sparkling in the chandelier light. Elroy and Zadie walked behind him like shadows. Zadie was in a long gray dress, pale, with a dull gaze. Elroy in a tight jacket, hunched over, twitchy. "Greetings, ladies and gentlemen," Cornelius boomed, spreading his arms. "Glad to see the cream of our society at one table." The guests responded with polite but cold nods. Cornelius didn't notice, or didn't want to notice. He walked to the head of the table and sat down, not even waiting for the ladies to be seated. Dinner began. Cornelius talked. He talked about the fate of the nation, about the decline of morals, about how important it is to preserve traditions. He ate sturgeon, washed it down with wine, and pontificated. "My line," he broadcasted, raising a glass, "has always served as an example. My grandfather fought in the war, my father built this city, and I, as the head of the family, carry this banner. We thorns, we are steel." Mrs. Calloway coughed delicately. "Excuse me, Cornelius," she said quietly, "but what regiment did your grandfather serve in? I was just going through the archives recently." Cornelius froze for a second, but immediately recovered. "Cavalry, of course. Guards regiment. Swords drawn. Huzzah!" Mrs. Calloway exchanged glances with Dr. Abernathy. A mixture of pity and contempt read in their eyes. The tension at the table grew. The guests barely ate. They were watching this one-man show, waiting for the climax, and Cornelius began to bring it closer himself. The wine hit his head. He felt the audience wasn't warming up and decided he needed to show power. "Zadie!" he barked suddenly, slamming his palm on the table. "Why are the glasses empty? Are you asleep? Tend to the guests. What did your mother teach you?" Zadie flinched, dropping her fork. The sound of silver on china rang out deafeningly. She jumped up hastily, grabbed a bottle of wine. Her hands were shaking. She reached for Mrs. Calloway's glass, but the bottle slipped from her damp fingers. Red wine splashed onto the tablecloth, spreading in an ugly stain that looked like blood. "Clumsy!" Cornelius roared. His face turned crimson. "You embarrass me. Can't even pour wine." He raised his hand. It was a reflex motion, practiced by years of impunity. He wanted to slap her hand or shove her, like he did at home. Elroy shrank into his chair, closing his eyes, but the blow never landed. I stood up calmly, without sudden movements. I walked over to Zadie, took the bottle from her hands, and set it on the table. Then I put my hand on her shoulder. My palm was heavy and warm. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the ensuing silence, it sounded like a gong strike. "She will not be pouring. She is not the help, and she is not your property." Cornelius slowly turned his head to me. His eyes bulged with surprise. "Mutiny on the ship from this gray mouse?" "What did you say?" he hissed. "You dare dictate to me in the presence of my family?" "This isn't your family, Cornelius." I called him by his first name without the Mr. for the first time in 20 years. "And this isn't your money." I pulled the folder from under a napkin, the one with the bank statement, and threw it on the table right onto the plate with the half-eaten sturgeon. "What is this?" He recoiled squeamishly. "That is the bill," I said. "The bill for your greatness. 3 loans in Zadie's name, $75,000. Money you stole from your children and threw to the wind on those investments of yours that popped like soap bubbles." The guests gasped. Dr. Abernathy reached for the folder, opened it, ran his eyes over the lines. "My God," he muttered. "Crypto guarantee? Cornelius, did you put the children's money into pyramid schemes?" Cornelius went pale. Sweat broke out on his forehead in large drops. "That's a lie," he shouted, jumping up. "It's a fabrication. This witch wants to frame me. I am a businessman. I have assets." "You have nothing," I cut him off. You are bankrupt, Cornelius. You live off your son's wife, whom you drive into debt by threatening to destroy her marriage. You aren't a patriarch. You are a parasite." "Silence!" he roared, losing human form. He grabbed a steak knife from the table. "I'll kill you!" Zadie screamed. The guests recoiled in horror. "Go ahead," I said, looking him straight in the eyes. I didn't step back an inch. "Strike me in front of witnesses. Show them all who the real Cornelius Thorne is." He froze with the knife in his hand. His chest heaved. He looked around. 10 pairs of eyes were staring at him, and in those eyes there was no respect, no fear, only disgust. He slowly lowered the knife. Silver clattered against the plate. You don't understand," he wheezed, trying to regain shreds of dignity. "I did it for the family, for the future." "For the future?" I asked. "What future? A future built on lies?" I took a step toward the table and picked up the second folder, the one that had been lying on the sideboard. The folder with Etta's letters. "Speaking of the future," I said, opening it, "and the past. You love to talk about blood so much, Cornelius, about dynasty, about how important it is to pass on genes." I pulled out the medical chart, old and tattered. "What is that?" He backed away. He recognized that notebook. I saw it in his eyes. Animal terror splashed in them. "It's a medical history," I said loudly, so everyone could hear, especially Elroy. "Your history, Cornelius. 1978. Elroy raised his head. For the first time all evening, he wasn't looking at the floor, but at me. A spark of understanding appeared in his gaze. "Don't you dare," Cornelius whispered. "Don't you dare." "Why?" I asked. "You love the truth. So let's tell the truth. Let's tell everyone, and your son too, why you hate him so much, why you tried to break him his whole life. Isn't it because every time you look at him, you remember he isn't yours?" The silence in the room became a vacuum. It felt like the air had vanished. "What?" Elroy's voice sounded raspy, like metal scraping. "What did you say, Mama?" I turned to my son-in-law. "He is not your father, Elroy. You are adopted. Your father is sterile." The bomb detonated. Shrapnel flew in all directions, and there was no way back. At the table, someone knocked over a glass, but no one turned at the sound of breaking glass. All eyes were glued to Cornelius. He stood white as a sheet, mouth twisted as if punched in the gut. His carefully constructed world, his myth of the dynasty, his power, it all crumbled to dust in 1 second. Elroy slowly rose from his chair. He looked at the man he had called father all his life with a strange, childlike bewilderment. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. "Pop, is it true?" Cornelius was silent. His chest heaved convulsively. He searched for words, searched for a lie that could save him, but this time the lie didn't come. Too many witnesses, too heavy the evidence lay on the table. "Elroy," he began hoarsely, trying to return to a commanding tone, but his voice cracked. "Don't listen to this crazy woman. She wants to tear us apart. She's jealous of our family." "Family?" Elroy repeated. Tears rang in his voice, but they weren't tears of pity. They were tears of revelation. "You told me my whole life I wasn't worthy of your blood, that I shamed the Thorne line. You beat me with a belt for getting C's because Thorns don't get C's. You made me quit music because men in our family are engineers. And now it turns out there is no family line?" "Shut up!" Cornelius roared, turning purple. "I raised you! I fed you! I made a man out of you! You should kiss my feet, you puppy!" He stepped toward Elroy, raising his hand. The habit of hitting, the habit of suppressing, worked automatically. But this time, Zadie stood between them. My quiet, intimidated daughter stepped forward and shielded her husband. She straightened up, squared her shoulders, and suddenly I saw in her that little girl who once wasn't afraid to climb trees and fight with boys. "Don't you dare," she said, clear, loud. "Don't you dare touch him." Cornelius stopped. He looked at Zadie, then at me, then at the guests who watched this scene with horror and revulsion. You all conspired?" he screamed, spitting saliva. "It's a conspiracy. You want to destroy me? I am Cornelius Thorne. I am a candidate for council. I will grind you all into powder." He lunged at me, fists clenched. "You old witch! You set this all up! Give me the papers!" He wanted to snatch the folder from me, but I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in the eyes, and in my eyes, he saw his death. Not physical, no, social. "I won't give you anything, Cornelius," I said in an icy tone. "And if you take one more step, if you lay a finger on my daughter or Elroy, I will send these documents not only to the council, I will send them to the district attorney along with a statement of fraud, along with recordings of your threats, along with Zadie's testimony about how you forced her to take loans." He froze. The word attorney acted on him like a bucket of ice water. He knew his financial affairs were a house of cards. He knew if anyone started digging, he would go to jail, and for a long time. "You wouldn't dare," he whispered. There was no confidence left in his voice. "I would," I answered. "I already have. I sold my jewelry, Cornelius, my grandmother's earrings, the ring my husband gave me. I paid off one of the loans this morning. Now I am your creditor. Part of the debt belongs to me, which means I have every right to demand answers." I was bluffing. I had only paid off a small part, the interest, to buy time. But he didn't know that. He was financially illiterate. He feared numbers just as much as he feared the truth. You're lying." "Want to check?" I took out my phone. "I have a recording of our conversation the day you dragged Zadie by her hair. Want me to play it right now? Let everyone hear how the patriarch speaks to women." I tapped the screen. The silence of the room was torn by his voice, recorded days ago. "A real woman is supposed to act in her husband's house." The sound was clear, vile. Cornelius backed away. He looked at the door. The guests were silent. Mrs. Calloway looked at him like she found a cockroach in her soup. Dr. Abernathy shook his head. Cornelius realized he had lost. His public execution had taken place. The mask was ripped off, and underneath was the ugly, pathetic face of a coward. He turned to Elroy. It was his last chance, the last hope that years of training still worked. "Son," he said, changing his tone to a pitiful, pleading one. "Son, don't listen to them. They want to separate us. I love you. I did everything for you. Was I strict? Yes, but times are hard. A man needs to be toughened. Let's go. Let's go home. We'll sort it out. We're family." He reached out his hand, the hand that a minute ago wanted to strike. Elroy looked at that hand. A painful struggle was happening in his eyes. 20 years of fear, 20 years of submission fought against 1 minute of truth. He looked at his father, then at me, then at Zadie, who still stood before him like a shield. And suddenly he exhaled deeply, convulsively, as if dropping a concrete slab from his shoulders. "No," he said. "What?" Cornelius blinked. "No," Elroy repeated firmer. "I'm not going anywhere with you. And I'm not your son. You said it yourself in the documents." "Elroy!" Cornelius squealed. "You're betraying your father." "I am betraying a lie," Elroy answered. He stepped to Zadie and took her hand. "My family is here. It's Zadie and Ms. Althea. And you're just a man who lived in my house." Cornelius staggered. It was the end. His creation, his project, his victim had rejected him. "Get out," I said quietly. "Get out of my house, Cornelius, and never come near my children again." He swept a wild gaze over everyone. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You'll all come crawling back to me on your knees. I am a thorn. I am—" "You are nobody," Mrs. Calloway interrupted him. She stood up and walked over to me. "Althea, darling, pour me some tea. And this gentleman, it seems, has overstayed his welcome. The door is that way." Cornelius grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. He ran out of the room, stumbling, ridiculous and pathetic in his anger. We heard the front door slam. Silence hung in the room, but it was a different silence. neither heavy nor suffocating. It was the silence after a storm, when the air becomes clean and fresh. Elroy sank onto a chair and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. He was crying. For the first time in years, he wasn't crying from humiliation, but from relief. Zadie hugged him, stroking his head. I looked at the guests. "I apologize for the scene," I said, fixing my hair. "It seems dinner is a bit ruined." "Oh, nonsense, Althea," Dr. Abernathy smiled, raising his glass. "On the contrary, this was the most honest dinner in years. To the truth, my friends." We clinked glasses. The sound of crystal was pure and joyful. I took a sip of wine and felt warmth spread through my body. The dragon was slain, but I knew he would still try to lash his tail. I was ready for it. The next morning, Cornelius didn't disappear. He came back. Not to the apartment. No, that path was closed to him. I had changed the locks that night, calling a 24-hour locksmith. He returned to Elroy's life, trying to punch a breach in his newfound armor through the phone. The calls started at 7 o'clock a.m. Elroy sat in the kitchen, pale, with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the screen where Father flashed. The phone vibrated, crawling across the table like a beetle, demanding attention. "Don't answer," Zadie said quietly, covering his hand with hers. But Elroy answered. The habit of obeying was too deep. He pressed answer and put it on speaker, as if he needed us to hear too, to be witnesses and protectors. "Elroy!" Cornelius's voice no longer sounded commanding, but hysterical, cracking into falsetto. "What are you doing? Do you realize what you've done? You disgraced me in front of the whole town, but I am ready to forgive. Do you hear? I am ready to forgive your stupidity. It's that old witch, Althea. She bewitched you. She always envied me, envied men, because she's an empty woman with no man of her own." I stood at the stove, flipping pancakes. My hand didn't tremble. His insults didn't wound anymore. They were predictable as autumn rain. "She's lying, Elroy," he continued, screaming into the phone. "Those documents are fakes. She bought them in an alley. I am your father. You are my blood. And if you don't come out to me right now, don't come downstairs, I will call the creditors right now. I'll tell them where your wifey lives. I'll tell them she's a fraud. They'll come, Elroy. The collectors will come. They'll take everything down to your underwear. Choose. Either you come down and we go to campaign headquarters, or your life turns into hell." Elroy looked up at me. Fear splashed in his eyes again. Fear of collectors, of the omnipotence of a father who always knew how to solve or create problems. I turned off the stove, wiped my hands on a towel, walked to the table, and took the phone from my son-in-law's hands. "Good morning, Cornelius," I said into the receiver in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. "You seem to have forgotten what I told you yesterday." "You—" He choked. "Put my son on." "You have no son," I cut off. "And regarding the creditors, don't bother. I already spoke to them." "What?" He choked. "I was at the bank, Cornelius, this morning at opening. I showed them documents. Not the ones about your sterility, that's personal, but the ones about your schemes. About how you forced Zadie to take loans under duress. About where the money went. You know, very smart people work in the bank security department. They really didn't like that their money was feeding pyramid schemes." Silence hung on the line, heavy, cotton-like. "You're bluffing," he croaked finally. "No. I filed an application for debt restructuring in connection with fraudulent actions of a third party. That is you. And I attached the recording of our conversation. That same one. The bank was very interested. They are already preparing a request to the police." It was a half-truth. I had indeed filed the application, but the bank was still only reviewing it. However, to Cornelius, who panicked at any audit, it sounded like a sentence. "Ah, you wretched," he whispered. "You have a choice, Cornelius," I continued, looking out the window where his figure loomed near his car. "You get in your car right now and drive away. You withdraw your candidacy from the election for health reasons, and you disappear from the city. If you do this, I might withdraw the statement. Might. But if you call Elroy or Zadie one more time, I will publish the medical registry. The whole city will know the last of the Thorns is a blank, a dud." I hung up. We walked to the window. Cornelius stood down there, looking up at our balcony. He looked like a deflated balloon. His shoulders slumped. He stood for a minute, then kicked the tire of his car, got behind the wheel, and peeled away abruptly. Elroy watched him go. "He left," he said quietly. "Yes." I nodded. "He left, but it wasn't the end yet. Cornelius was wounded, but not killed. His ego couldn't accept defeat." An hour later, the doorbell rang. A courier stood on the doorstep. He brought an envelope. Inside was a subpoena. Cornelius was suing Elroy, demanding reimbursement for upbringing and maintenance expenses for the last 18 years. An absurd, insane lawsuit dictated by desperation and a desire to hurt one last time. He demanded millions. Elroy read the paper and went white. "He wants to sue," he whispered. "Mama, he wants to sue me for everything I've earned." "He wants to scare you," I said, tearing the subpoena in half. "This is the raving of a madman. No court will accept this, but he wants to fray our nerves." "I'm going to him," Elroy said suddenly. Zadie and I exchanged looks. "No," my daughter cried out. "You aren't going. I won't let you." "I have to." Elroy stood up. His face changed. That softness, that looseness that was always in him disappeared. A hardness appeared. "I have to look him in the eye one time and say everything myself. Not on the phone, not through you, Ms. Althea. Myself. Otherwise, I will never be free." I realized he was right. This was his closure, his battle. I gave him the weapon, but he had to deliver the strike. "All right," I said. "Go. But remember, you owe him nothing. Absolutely nothing." Elroy left. We waited for him for 2 hours. Those were the longest 2 hours of my life. Zadie paced the room. I sat in the armchair, clutching the rosary I found in Etta's jewelry box. He returned, calm. "Well?" Zadie rushed to him. Elroy sat on the sofa and unbuttoned his collar. "He screamed," he said. "He cried. He threatened. He offered me money if I came back and played the role of son for the election. He said without him I am nobody." "And you?" I asked. "And me?" Elroy smiled a weak but genuine smile. "I just listened. I looked at him and saw an old man. A lonely, pathetic old man who built a castle out of sand his whole life. And when he finished yelling and demanded I hand him his coat like before." Zadie held her breath. "I stood up, took the coat, walked up to him. He straightened his shoulders, thought I broke, and I just hung the coat on the rack, opened the door, and said, 'Dress yourself, Cornelius. You have hands.' And I left." I exhaled. Warmth spread through my chest. "He screamed at my back," Elroy added, "but I didn't hear any more. I walked and thought, what a good day it is today." At that moment, as if confirming his words, the sun came out from behind the clouds, flooding the room with bright light. The shadow of the dynasty had dissipated. We won, but ahead lay the hardest part, learning to live without war, to live just because, happily. 3 months have passed. If you walked into our apartment now, you wouldn't recognize it. The first thing we did was get rid of those heavy, dusty drapes Cornelius loved so much. Now the windows are open to the light, and light ivory tulle sways in the spring breeze. The air in the house has changed. It no longer smells of fear and heart drops. It smells of linseed oil and turpentine. Zadie is painting again. Her easel stands in the exact spot where she once stood on her knees. Now she stands here at full height, brush in hand, and on her canvases bloom bright living cities where no one holds anyone prisoner. Elroy doesn't live with us. That was my condition, and to my surprise, he insisted on it himself. He's renting a small studio on the other side of town. He goes to a therapist, learns to breathe again, learns to make decisions, from choosing toothpaste to planning a budget. He and Zadie, they're like high schoolers now, going on dates, walking in the park, getting to know each other all over again without the looming shadow of a father. I see Elroy look at her not as a life raft, but as a woman he chooses every day of his own free will. And me? I return to where I always felt best, the cabin. I'm sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. Before me steams a cup of tea, the same one made of fine china with a gold rim that I drank from when I declared war on Cornelius. Now it is my victor's cup. Around me is silence, but it's not that ringing emptiness of loneliness. It is the silence of peace. I spent the whole morning in the garden, planting roses. My hands, used to the paper dust of archives, are now in the earth. I'm planting the peace rose variety, large yellow-pink buds. They say they are very resilient, like us. The gate creaked. It was the mail carrier, old Mr. Fred, bringing newspapers and bills. I wasn't expecting letters, but among the electric bills lay a plain white envelope with no return address. The postmark was blurry, but I made out the name of the town, a distant county seat way up north, where winter lasts 6 months. I opened the envelope. Inside, there was no letter, just a clipping from a local paper, the Northern Herald, dated last week. The blurb was tiny, in the miscellaneous column. A poor-quality photo showed the opening of some municipal archive or DMV office. In the center, cutting the ribbon, stood the mayor of that town, and to the side, in the background, in a baggy, cheap suit with a folder under his arm, stood him, Cornelius. He looked small, hunched. Where did his lordly posture go? Where did that commanding squint vanish? In the photo was an ordinary, tired clerk. Junior Record Specialist, the caption read, listing those present. He fled to the edge of the world to start over. But there, in that cold land, without Zadie's money, without my silence, without Elroy's submission, he became who he really was, nobody. A small man with big ambitions that are now only good for shuffling papers from one desk to another. I looked at his face on the grainy newsprint. I felt neither schadenfreude nor pity, only deep, absolute indifference. He was to me no more than a historical fact, an unpleasant episode that had finally concluded. I took out a box of matches, struck the sulfur head. The flame danced in the wind, but I shielded it with my palm. I held the flame to the corner of the newspaper clipping. The paper flared up instantly. I held it until the fire reached Cornelius's very face, devouring his fake smile, his fear, his past. The ash fell to the ground at the roots of my new roses. Good fertilizer. "Goodbye, Cornelius," I said aloud. The wind picked up the black, weightless dust and carried it into the garden, dissolving it in the air. I took a sip of tea. It was strong, sweet, and hot, the taste of freedom. I closed my eyes and turned my face to the spring sun. I am no longer just a mother or a grandmother, and certainly not a quiet mouse. I am a keeper who was able to protect her fortress, and now, for the first time in many years, the gates of this fortress are open only for happiness. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.